Hello and welcome. My name is Sara Harberson. I'm America's college counselor. Thank you so much for joining me on this rapid fire Q&A. I'm going to be answering all of your college admissions questions. So if you have one, type them into the comment section below the live feed. I should mention that we are streaming live on both of my Facebook pages, Admissions Revolution and Sara Harberson. There's a lot going on in college admissions. Every single day, new news comes out, a new policy, a new change in how colleges are evaluating applications. And this is affecting every single high school student who is college bound. So I'm excited to jump on to Facebook Live every single month so that I'm able to answer the questions that you all have. I just finished a great session with my Application Nation group about college essays, but I know there are a lot of high school seniors still trying to get their applications together. Deadlines are going to be approaching, especially for those early deadlines like early decision and early action. And obviously those rolling admissions programs are a smart move. I did a blog on rolling admissions programs a couple of weeks ago, so check it out. And it's my recommendation that every student should have at least one rolling admissions school on their list. It's usually a college that has a higher acceptance rate, and there is more room in the class at the end of the summer and beginning of fall, the student's senior year. So it's nice to be able to send in a rolling admissions application pretty early into senior year. And a few weeks later, you should hopefully be getting some good news that you got accepted. And that takes a lot of pressure off of students right from the beginning. But I can see the questions are coming in, so I wanted to start answering them. First question about testing. After all the test cancellations through summer, will you suggest not to submit an ACT of a 33 as a majority applicant to a school with a middle 50% between 33 and 35? So this family knows a lot about my approach and how colleges look at testing. So what I generally say is that if you are a majority student, and just by the way, I'm from New Jersey, I'm a straight shooter. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going on in the admissions process, including how race factors in. If you're a majority student, a white student, an Asian American student, an Indian American student, that's usually considered a majority applicant within a college's applicant pool. There are going to be higher expectations for the most part, unless the colleges do not use race in the admissions process. And so I generally say that if you're applying to a highly selective college, like an Ivy League institution or an Ivy type institution, your SAT scores or ACT scores need to be pretty strong. So you want to look at the college's middle 50% range. For this family, they were saying that college's middle 50% range of admitted students is between a 33 and a 35. So a 33 is a really good score. I think in a normal year, I usually like to have a student get a 34 if they're a majority applicant to be the most competitive. But I think this year, given that so many students are not able to take SATs and ACTs, I think generally speaking, those scores are going to be a little bit lower going into this admission cycle. So a 33 is probably okay, but I think anything lower at a highly selected college, you might want to consider applying test optional. And most of the colleges in this country have gone test optional for the coming year. Next question, for the COVID section, what is okay to put down? You're really going to get conflicting advice about this. I don't know if you all saw the Doug Belkin article in the Wall Street Journal over the last 24 hours, but it's about how COVID has impacted the admissions process. Some college admissions experts are saying, why not use the COVID section in the common application? It's there for a reason. My belief is that these admissions officers are going to have COVID fatigue by about the 100th application that they read for this year. And so it's my belief that students should be cautious and judicious with using the COVID section. It is not a required part of the application. The advice that I've been giving to the students that I work with is if you have been significantly impacted and negatively impacted beyond the norm because of COVID, you've had COVID, a close family member has COVID, someone has died close to you, your parents have lost jobs, you were planning to do or go to a national competition, but it got canceled. These are big things. Then I would encourage you to use the COVID section to explain that. It's not an essay. It's just a section. There are only 250 words that you can fit into that section, so use those words carefully. I think every student in the world, every family has been impacted by COVID in some way, but I would use that section if you have been significantly negatively impacted beyond the norm. Next question. Do higher early decision acceptance rates reflect student athletes who are recruited versus a true general acceptance rate? Melissa, this is a great question. So I often say that if a college offers early decision, you can expect that the acceptance rate in early decision is going to be higher, sometimes significantly higher than that college's acceptance rate in regular decision. The reasons for that is the student who applies early decision is committed to going to that college. So if the student is admitted, that college can count on that student as enrolling. By regular decision, that same college might have to admit 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 students in regular decision just to enroll one of them. So there are a lot of advantages if you apply early decision. But the truth is that most college coaches are going to try to get their recruited athletes to commit early to them and apply early decision, or in some cases if the college has early action. So you have to automatically build into that acceptance rate the fact that there are going to be recruited athletes in that early decision or early action pool. However, even if you remove those recruited athletes, your chances of getting admitted to that college in early decision are going to be higher, sometimes double the rate in regular decision. So even if you're not a recruited athlete, your best shot, if you can commit to that college in early decision, is to go early decision. All right, next question. Do you think early decision will help for Brown University, even if I don't have test scores but have a good GPA? So I just got interviewed by the college newspaper at Brown University to talk about Brown's yield rate overall. They've had the highest yield rate ever. I think it's about 66%. Now, a lot of that is driven because they have early decision and they're going to be locking in probably in the 40% range of their freshman class just through early decision alone. And so you definitely are going to have an advantage if you're competitive for Brown to begin with. I don't want students using early decision if they're not going to be competitive, whether they apply early or regular. But if you are competitive, based on the required pieces of the application, your best shot is in early decision. What I will say is that Brown is super popular right now. That's why we're seeing them have their highest yield rate ever. And so even though I believe that most early decision applicant pools will be smaller this year because students haven't been able to visit as many colleges on their list, I believe that Brown is going to see a very strong early decision applicant pool. Will it be as big as it was last year or the year before? Probably not, but I think it's still going to be very competitive for Brown. That's the article. Thank you guys for posting it. Yeah. Next question. Is it still worth it to take the SAT? I hope to apply early action, but I will not have scores in time. So there are a couple things to keep in mind for those high school seniors who haven't had an opportunity to take the SAT or ACT or took it before the pandemic or during the pandemic and they're not happy with the scores. For the most part, colleges are going to offer the student to apply test optional, meaning that they don't have to submit the SAT or ACT with their application. But for a lot of colleges, let's say you apply test optional and then by pure luck, you are able to take the October SAT, for example. You submit your early decision or early action application before that, but your scores come in after that. If they are strong, almost always, especially for those private colleges, I have a strong suspicion that almost always those colleges will allow you to send those scores in after the fact. However, I will point out that there are a number of institutions, mostly the very large state and public universities, have already said that if you apply under an early action policy, when you apply to their institution, you can't send late scores after the fact. So you just want to make sure that you understand the testing policy so that if you're able to take a late test, that college will allow you to send in those scores after the fact. All right, next question. Does it matter if you only participate in an extracurricular for junior and senior year if you have a big impact on those activities? So students are going to have a range of activities on their list. If you're using Common App, you have up to 10 spots, so you could list up to 10 activities. And there are going to be some activities that students do that they've been doing since 9th grade on. There are some experiences that a student may only do in 9th grade or 10th grade, or maybe only in 11th grade. There are also some experiences where they join a club or an organization or start doing, pursuing a hobby, and they start it in 11th grade and they do it for 11th and 12th grade. If you have a lot of impact, make sure that comes through in the description. So I spend my days and weeks right now making little tweaks and little edits to students' activities listings for Common App or Coalition App, for example. Most students, 99% of the time, are going to describe activities in a really generic, basic way, when in fact, if you have made an impact in your community or on a hobby or in an industry, let's say, maybe you are a music producer of electronic music, make sure you show that impact with how you describe yourself, the role that or position that you have, and also in the description. A lot of students say, well, I only have 150 characters to describe what I do. But you would be amazed what you can do with 150 characters, especially if you think of yourself as a really distinctive individual. All right, next question. Do colleges evaluate dual enrollment differently than AP classes? It depends on the colleges, but I generally say that if you are applying to highly selective colleges, usually private institutions, but some of the highly selective public universities, they usually are going to prefer AP classes if you have a choice between AP or dual enrollment DE classes. And that is because a lot of times when a student is doing a dual enrollment class, they're getting credit to graduate from high school. And then the student wants to use that credit to also put towards graduation from college. But the reality is if you are applying to the more selective colleges, they prefer the AP classes over the dual enrollment. So if you have a choice and you know that you can perform well in those AP classes, I would suggest going that route. However, there are a lot of students, high achieving students as well, who decide that they want to stay in state for college because they know if they go to their local state university, the tuition is going to be a lot cheaper because they have in-state tuition, and maybe there's some perks because they want to do the honors program there. If you're staying in-state for college and going to a state institution, a lot of times those dual enrollment classes are going to help you not just in the admissions process, but also once you enroll, because a lot of times those dual enrollment classes that you got credit for in high school will also be put towards your undergraduate degree. So that is one advantage, one of many advantages to taking dual enrollment, especially if you're going to be staying in state for college. Next question, does it hurt if a student takes an AP course but doesn't take the exam? So this is really tricky. So generally speaking, if a student takes the AP class, admissions officers almost expect the student to take the AP exam. However, AP scores are usually not required in the admissions process, so students usually have a decision to make about which scores they're actually going to share in their application. But if they don't take the exam, they have no scores to share. But I think most admissions officers want to see the student. If they take the AP class, they're taking the AP exam. But this question came up a lot in the last 24 hours in our Application Nation Class of 2021 group, because a lot of the students who are seniors, they're filling out their application, and they also have to decide which AP exams they're going to be taking in May of senior year. My general advice to them is when you get to that part in the application, for example, in the testing section in Common App, it will ask you not only if you're reporting any scores from previous AP exams, but whether or not you're going to be taking any future AP exams. And if you know in your heart, at least right now, that you want to take these AP exams at the end of the year, you should list them. However, the truth is that if something happens, just like the pandemic and these AP exams were really difficult to take this last May, or you get sick on the day of an AP exam. Things can happen. And so it's okay if you decide not to do it, especially for senior year, because at that point in the process, the admissions process is basically done. It's not that I'm condoning students to say one thing and do another, but anything can happen during the year. And what you list that you're going to take in May that no longer factors into the admissions process, it could factor into getting credit at a certain college, but for the admissions process, it's usually done. It's okay if something comes up and you decide that you're not able to, or you can't, or you don't want to take that AP exam for senior year. But those younger students, I generally recommend that you try to do it. And hopefully the College Board will have it all figured out, especially if those AP exams are online again. Next question, do you recommend not filling out the race section if you're white? I recommend that every single student fill out their race and their ethnicity. And I've been saying this for years, not only as an admissions officer, but a dean of admissions, and now as America's college counselor. Because here are the reasons why, and there are many of them. If you don't fill out your race and you have been discriminated against in the admissions process because of your race, you have no leg to stand on. You have no case, because even though an admissions officer may have assumed your race, if you don't self-identify, you have no protection. The other reason why I think it's really important to list your race, whether you're a majority student or a student coming from an underrepresented background, is these admissions officers are making judgments, making assumptions about the student. And if you don't make yourself clear about who you are, they could misrepresent you or misunderstand you or get the wrong idea. And so it's my belief that students should proudly state their race no matter what it is on the application. It no longer protects them against discrimination, because these admissions officers have to be so careful right now in terms of making sure that they do not discriminate for racial reasons and other reasons, but it allows you to really make it clear who you are in that application, and it will scare those admissions officers and make sure that they do not bias or discriminate against you in the admissions process. Next question. My daughter just had her SAT test canceled. Should she still use her time to study in hopes of taking the test? Or should she use her time concentrating on writing a great essay? It's such a personal decision, but I believe that if the student's high school transcript and everything else in their application is really, really strong, and the colleges on their lists are all test optional, it's my belief for the student to take a step back and focus on what's really important. Doing well senior year, writing those really special essays, making sure your application is as strong as possible, than having to worry about studying for another test. And you all know this. You are studying for test after test after test. Sometimes you're able to register, and then you find out sometimes a day in advance or the day of the test that the test is not actually happening. Or in some cases, there are families who are driving hours, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours just to get to a testing site. And once they get to that testing site, the student then has to worry about how safe it is for them to take the test. So if everything else is really strong, it's my belief, put your energy towards the things that are really going to make a difference. Because here's the thing. Let's say you're able to register for that test. Let's say you're able to take that test. And maybe that's the first time you're taking it. Almost always, that's not going to be your best score. So you're going to go through all of this to take it. And then you're going to get back a score. And then if you work with me or you're part of Application Nation, or you ask a question on a Facebook Live or Instagram Live and you say, this is my score, and I'm going to say, I don't think you should send it along to the colleges because it's not at least in that middle 50% range of admitted student scores. So make sure that if you're going to go through all that, that you're going to get a strong score. But even if you prepare, you may still not be able to take the test. Next question. Hi, Sarah. My son is a senior and has a 3.89 GPA. He took a summer class at a local community college and got a B. Will the B that he got in the class be a red flag to the admissions officer, or shall we use it to demonstrate another rigor rigorous course he took and what he learned from it. So my answer is going to vary depending on the college that colleges that are on his list. So I actually love when a student is, if they want to take a college class, I always tell them first to look at their community college, because those classes are a whole lot cheaper than trying to take a class at some fancy institution like Harvard University, where the class is usually going to be thousands of dollars to do. And at this point, all these classes are basically virtual, especially the ones taken this summer. So I love a community college class, especially if it points to the student's academic interest. However, if the student is applying to a highly selected college, and you take a community college class or a class at your local university, or you take a class at Harvard online, whatever the case may be, and you get a B in the class and it directly relates to what you want to major in at a highly selected college, that's good. There are going to be students getting A's. However, if the student is applying to less selective institutions, that could show that they are curious about the academic subject and that they're willing to go above and beyond their high school curriculum. But you want to be careful, because that community college transcript is technically not required. The colleges wouldn't know unless you provide it. So if you're going to provide that transcript from that community college or a local university, make sure it's going to strengthen your application, because it's not an official it's not a required part of your application to begin with. So all those students who send in extra things like an extra resume or an art supplement or an extra essay, if you send it along, it could be evaluated even if it's not required. And if that admissions officer doesn't think your art supplement is as good as some of the others they've seen, or that extra essay or that resume, even though everything's already listed on your application, isn't as strong as they were hoping, that can be held against you in the admissions process, because it becomes a formal part of your application once you send it in. Next question. Is it okay to write about your experiences during COVID in your regular essay? So you're going to get different opinions about this, but just as I said that admissions officers are going to get COVID fatigue by looking at that COVID section, you have to be careful about writing your college essay about your COVID experience unless it is highly unusual. And I look over a lot of essay topics. So before students write an essay, if they're gonna want me to approve it and give them my blessing, I have to approve the topic. I approved one essay this year, one main college essay on COVID. And I approved it because it was a really unusual situation and the student wrote an unbelievable essay about it. But most students are going to be faced with, writing an essay about something that all people, not only Americans, everybody around the world has been dealing with. So I think if you're going to write your main college essay about your COVID experience, it needs to be from a very different angle and something that no one else has experienced. And that's going to be hard. It can be done, but it's going to be hard. Next question. Is there any reason to apply early in rolling admissions as it relates to merit? So merit and rolling admissions, those are two different things, but they sometimes go together. So my recommendation is always that blog from a couple of weeks ago. I don't care how talented you are, how special you are, if you're number one in your class, you have perfect SAT scores, I still want you to apply to a rolling admissions school because it's an early acceptance and it can happen early on. So just as there's a whole lot more room in the class in August, September, and October for that student to apply in rolling admissions and get an acceptance, there's a whole lot more money to give out as well. So I think it can help you not only in the admissions process for a rolling admissions program, but it can also help you get merit as well, to apply as early as you can, like right now, guys, right now. So if you were to apply to Pitt, for example, you could do it through the Common App. You can actually do it through the Pitt application. They have their own, and you don't have to write an essay. If you're a strong student, you could submit your application to the University of Pittsburgh, which is a phenomenal institution. And a few weeks later, you could get a decision back, and hopefully it's an acceptance. Next question. Can you use the COVID essay to talk about ways you helped your community during the quarantine? So for the COVID section, again, I don't call it a COVID essay. It's just a COVID section that has been added to Common App this year. And my guess is it might continue for the next couple of years because we have younger students who have been impacted by COVID who are going to be applying down the road. But the question, my apologies, let me just make sure I have it completely. Yes. So I get this question a lot. Should you use that COVID section to write something really positive and generous that you did for your family or for your community? You might get differing answers, but it's my belief if you did something for your community or even for your family, and it's really positive and you made an impact on them, make sure you put it into your activities list, because that is where you put things that you've done positively to contribute to a club or an organization, okay? So it's my belief it should be listed in the activities list rather than the COVID section. Leave the COVID section, in my opinion, for those very unusual, really difficult situations that the student face, whether it had to do with their schooling in the spring, whether it had to do with their financial situation, their parents, or their own health, or someone very close to them. Next question, what are colleges basing admissions on this year? Well, a lot of colleges, and I would say the vast majority of colleges, have gone test optional. And I believe that the majority of those applicant pools will be students applying under the test optional policy. So I believe that it will be a small percentage, maybe 20%, 30%, 40% of an applicant pool will submit scores, but the rest, the majority, will not. And so it means that everything else in the application is going to matter much more than it already did. So the transcript always counts the most in the admissions process. So if you're not submitting scores, you want to make sure that your transcript is as strong as possible and is going to be competitive for the colleges on your list. They're going to be looking more closely at recommendation letters and essays. We've gotten some really good intel on a couple of the wonderful, flagship state universities like Penn State, for example. Because they've gone test optional, we've gotten some intel from admissions officers there that they're going to be focused a lot more on the essay. In past years, they get so many applications that they might skip over the essay, but in this landscape, those essays are going to mean a whole lot more. So the transcript's going to matter, recommendations letters are going to matter, essays are going to matter, activities as well. So just because you don't submit scores doesn't mean you've got to walk in the park. You want to make sure that every piece of your application is extremely strong for the colleges on your list. And as always, when you're putting together a college list, you want to have, ideally, an equal number of reach colleges, target colleges, and likely colleges. You don't just want to fill your list with reach colleges because that's not smart. You want to make sure that you have colleges on your list where you've got a very good chance of getting accepted to. How many colleges should be on your list? It's funny, I just edited that chapter in my book. And I like to see a final list. It's not set in stone, and it can be shorter, it can be longer, but in my book, I say that I usually want a college list between 9 and 12 colleges. But I see a lot of students that have more than that, and I see students with, less than that. I would just say that if you apply to more colleges than that, it's a lot of work, and it costs a lot of money too. But the lot of work piece, that can really hit you very quickly, because a lot of selective colleges are not just asking for a main college essay, they're asking for supplemental essays as well. And some of their supplemental essays is not just one, sometimes it's multiple ones. Like the University of Chicago, they require 2 supplemental essays in addition to the main college essay. And those supplemental essays that you're writing for the University of Chicago are very challenging and take a lot of time. But also, unless your application fee is being waived, it costs money to apply to these colleges. And if official score reports are required, that's going to cost money as well. So you just want to keep that in mind. So I say 9 to 12. But it can be more and it can be less. All right, a few more questions. If my son is a first-generation American, both parents born and raised in Mexico, does he only compete against the Hispanics of applicants applying to the university? No. So here's how it works at most institutions. When an admissions officer begins to read a student's application, they're grabbing little bits of information even before they really start evaluating all those required pieces like the transcript, test scores if they're available, recommendation letters, activities lists, essays, sometimes an interview report is in there. They're getting a quick snapshot about who that student is. And they'll see right in front of them the student's race, their address, their high school, their major choice, their GPA, their class rank if it's offered, their test scores. And that will give the admissions officer a quick snapshot before they start reading the required pieces of the application. So race is something that you can't change, but it can actually and absolutely dictate how an application is read. But generally speaking, race is part of holistic admissions. It doesn't mean that colleges are discussing and evaluating only the Mexican-American students in the applicant pool at one time. They are going to be evaluating all the students combined. But the students that you are traditionally compared to is not necessarily your race, even though that comes into play in the admissions process. A lot of times, they are looking at how you compare to the other students from your high school and the other students from your high school that have applied that year. So you're not competing against students from the high school down the street or the high school across the country, because every high school has different curriculum offerings and different grading policies, but a lot of times your curriculum especially and your grades are going to be compared to the other students from your high school and the other students from your high school that have applied. But race is absolutely going to be factored in at the vast majority of colleges. There are only a handful of colleges that no longer use race in the admissions process, and that's usually a result of a discrimination case against that institution from several years prior. Next question. Any idea if the Florida State colleges will go test optional? Oh, Joan, what is taking them this long? So not every single college has gone test optional. And what we saw this spring was a lot of the private institutions, for the most part, they were the ones to go test optional first for the most part. And a lot of the public and state universities were slower, but most of them have gone test optional. Even the University of Georgia, which I thought was never going to do it. But you know what? I wrote to them, I wrote to the chancellor, and so did so many of you. And that made a difference. And so they have now gone test optional. We need to put pressure. We need to put pressure, especially in Florida. You know, you have so many students in state applying to the Florida institutions, and they have been hit especially hard with COVID. So it's very difficult for those students in Florida, and frankly, out-of-state applicants too, to take these tests. But if University of Florida and Florida State doesn't go test optional, it's only going to hurt those institutions. Think about it. Think about how many students are not going to be able to apply because they don't have test scores. So University of Florida, Florida State, those Florida State institutions are continuing to hold out as long as they possibly can. But let's continue to put pressure on them. Let's write to them. Write to the chancellors, the governor, your senator, whatever you need to do. And I've been doing my part as well, because the more pressure we put on them, the more they're going to have to respond. And the fact is, colleges usually in the end, they're selfish. They're going to set policy that's going to ultimately help them. And if these Florida institutions don't go test optional, it's only going to hurt them. They're going to see a fraction of their applicant pool this year. So the pressure's on. Let's see if they do it, and do it soon. Next question. How big, and this probably has to be our last, how big of a factor is legacy to a university? As I've been saying all night, it really depends on the institution. But one way to tell if legacy is factored in is to look at the college's application or the college's supplement. And they will ask, you know, what members of your family have gone to that institution. You will be able to tell if they value the undergraduate legacy tag more than the graduate tag, if grandparents, if they got a degree from the institution, if that matters. But it's going to vary from school to school. what I'm seeing, at least with the elite institutions, is that the legacy tag is not nearly as powerful as it once was. Does it still factor in for most institutions? Yes, but for those elite institutions, it doesn't give that student kind of a free pass to get in. And I will also mention Johns Hopkins University announced after the fact that they hadn't been using legacy in the admissions process for several years. So what I would say is those elite schools, even if they haven't done away with legacy admissions, they've definitely turned it down. When I first started in college admissions and I worked at the University of Pennsylvania, there were so many legacy students applying to Penn and getting in, and the acceptance rate for those legacy applicants was significantly higher than a non-legacy. Nowadays, you're going to see that that acceptance rate for legacies is not nearly as high as it used to be. So you just want to take a look at the application, take a look at the supplement, and you can always contact the admissions office as well to find out how much they factor in. On that note, I think we've got to wrap up. It was really great to see all of you. And here's the thing. If you have more questions, I do these Facebook Lives every single month. But I also do Instagram Lives every Friday afternoon and answer your questions there. So you can join me tomorrow afternoon, 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Instagram Live, and I'll be back answering your college admissions once again. It was good to see everyone. I hope that this has been helpful and look forward to seeing you here next month. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.